Today's daf we're going to learn is Yoma daf lamed bet. If you recall, yesterday at the end of class, we saw this machloket Rabbi Meir and the rabbis about the dipping. When you wash, you do the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, washing hands before and after, or we didn't know exactly, but connected with getting dressed. And we saw we're going to see actually today different opinions about when these are done before, after, all different aspects of that. What we saw is that the rabbis disagree with Rav Papa's understanding, and they explained that there was a braita that shows that Rabbi Meir actually disagrees with our Mishnah. And in our Mishnah, it only described one kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, washing the hands and the feet, before, with one of them with the first dipping in the mikvah. And it was only after he puts the clothes on. To which we said that Rabbi Meir says, no, there's actually two, because even though he's taking off bigdei chol, regular clothes, there's no washing connected with that. So according to the rabbis, we don't wash because it's bigdei chol. According to Rabbi Meir, we actually do two washings of the hand because the washing isn't connected to the taking off the clothes. It's connected to putting on the clothes. And since he's putting on sanctified clothes, we do two washings, one before, one after putting the clothes on. To which we said, well, Bishlam ala Rabbi Meir, that works very well. According to Rabbi Meir, I'm at the very bottom of Lamed Aleph on the bet. That's how we get to 10, because each dipping in the mikveh has two associated with it, one before and after getting dressed each time. But according to the rabbis, there's only 9, because every time he changes his clothes, and we're going to go through, maybe I should go through right now with the intro, and I put it on the sheet for today. The order of the Kohen Gadol's activities are as such. First, he does, we've seen this, the Korban Tamid and the Ktoret and part of the Korbanot Musaf. That's his first activity. When he finishes with that, he does Bigdei Zahav. So the first dipping is before that. The second, which we now said is either 1 or 2 Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. Then he does the Par and the Shiur of the Kohen Gadol for Yom Kippurim. He puts the blood, he does the Ktoret, he does all that on the inside. For that, he needs the white clothes. So again, before that, there's going to be another dipping, and there's going to be 2 washings of the hand. Then he brings his ayil. There's a special ayil for the Kohen and his family. Then there's one ayil for the nation. Okay, it's mentioned. There's a big debate about this ayil exactly, but there's an ayil he brings as a korban olah. These are both korbanot olah that he does for the people. That already is a regular. He wears regular clothes for that because he wears the white clothes. I want to clarify what I've said before. When he does the special avodah of Yom Kippurim, not necessarily everything that's unique to Yom Kippurim, but the special avodah of Yom Kippurim that he does inside the Kodesh Kodeshim. Right? That's why they say they shouldn't be gold because of Ein Kategor Na'aseh Sanigul. You don't want to remind God of the golden calf. So the clothes, you go in with white clothes. That's when you go into the sanctuary, in the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies. The ayil, the korban olah that he brings for himself, that's unique to Yom Kippur, and this ayil of the people, those are done, it's a ram, those are done not in the Kodesh Kodeshim, they're done outside in the regular altar. So there he just uses regular clothes. Then he goes back in, and we're going to see this later, where exactly we get this from, but he goes back in to take out the spoon that he brings in, the kaf, sort of like a spoon, and the machta, the pan that he brings in with the coals, that he goes into Kodesh Kodeshim. Apparently he leaves them there when he's there the first time, and he goes in again to take them out. In order to go in again to the Holy of Holies, he needs to change his clothes. So he changes his clothes another time. So we have again, before the Korban Tamid, we have a second time before he does the special avodah of Yom Kippur of the bull and the seirim, right? The seir that he sacrifices, and he takes the blood and all that and brings it inside. Then we have, by the way, he goes in and out of Kodesh Kodeshim at that point, but that doesn't matter because he hasn't switched to a different avodah. I should really clarify better. It's not anytime he goes in, it's anytime he goes into the Kodesh Kodeshim and then goes and does something different in between and then goes back in, right? When he switches avodot from avodah to avodah, then a different ritual, then he needs to, right here he takes the blood, then he goes back out, and then he mixes the blood. We'll get into all the details. But all that is done, it's all part of one and the same thing. So he doesn't need to go in the mikveh in between. It's only when he switches to something else that no longer requires the clothes, then he needs to start switching clothes and going to the mikveh. So that's the second. The third is before the ayil of him and the ram offerings. The fourth is before he takes out. Then after he does the rams, then he goes back in, so he needs another. And then the last dunking in the mikveh is before he does the rest of the korbanot musaf. And then some of those, by the way, I didn't say this clearly in the beginning, he does the korban tamid and the ktoret and some of the korbanot musaf. And then in the afternoon, he also does the korban tamid of the afternoon and some of the korbanot musaf and the ktoret and lighting the menorah. Okay, so that's his order. So that's how we got to 5. And each time he's going to do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim before and after, and again, according to Rabbi Meir, before and after putting the clothes on. And according to the rabbis, it'll be connected with undressing and dressing. And that's why the first one doesn't have any. Everything else is going to have 2. So we're stuck with, why do we have Elul Rabbanan, Tisha Ahavu? There should only be 9. To which they say, Amr Lecha Rabbanan, Kiddush Batra, Ki Pashit Bigdei Kodesh, V'Lavish Bigdei Chol, Avid Lehatam. You do the dip, after, even though you're not going to the mikveh, when you're done with the korbanot tamid and you take off the Kohen Gadol clothes, in the taking off those clothes, the rabbis will say, oh, you're taking off holy clothes, you do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, even though it's not associated with the dipping in the mikveh. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to bring a braita that's going to describe, it's going to connect to our Mishnah, and we're going to see some sources here. Uba Aharon HaKohen al Ohel Moed. Now I talked about this kaf and the machta and how he goes back for it after. So now we have a little bit of an issue with the psukim. Lama huba. So it says in the pasuk, okay, now I brought on the sheet today a list of all the verses of the chapter 26 that are important, starting from Gimel to pasuk Kaf He. And if you look at pasuk, where is it? Kaf Gimel, I think it is. No, it's in, no, sorry, my mistake. So let's find the verse. It's pasuk Kaf Gimel. So why don't I see it here? It's pasuk Kaf Gimel. After the Shiur carries out, it says here, "V'nasa Shiur alav et kol avonotam," in Kaf Bet first, El Eretz Gzera v'shalach et Shiur b'midbar. The psukim describe all of the actions the Kohen Gadol does with the par and the Shiur and the special Yom Kippurim offerings. But the verses here, by the way, don't discuss the Musaf offering and things like that. But then it says, Uba Aharon el Ohel Moed, upashat et bigdei abad asher lavash b'va'ol hakodesh v'nicham sham. It's a very strange verse. It says, Aaron goes into Ohel Moed, okay, which is the sanctified area. And then it says he takes off his clothes that he was wearing, his white clothes. V'nicham sham, and he leaves them there. We had all this drashot on v'nicham sham. But now, there's something strange about this. First of all, he goes into Ohel Moed and he takes his clothes off. What, you think he's going to go into the sanctuary to take his clothes off, or the holy area? We're going to see actually that this is actually Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies. He's going to go in and get undressed there. That doesn't make any sense. And what's his purpose? Why is he going in there? He already came out. He already did all this other stuff. So now what they say is this must be referring to, what could he possibly be going in for? He must have left the kaf and the machta inside, and now he needs to take them out. Remember that spoon or shovel kind of thing, and the pan. So he takes them out. So it sounds like what we described is he takes it out after he does the ram offerings. But if you look at the psukim here, it then says, the next verse I'm in, so then he goes to the mikveh after he gets out from the Kodesh Kodeshim. He wears the clothes, meaning he switches his clothes back to the Kohen Gadol's usual clothing. And then he does his olah, his burnt offering, and the olah of the people. That's the ram offerings. So it sounds like the order that we described is not what it says in the Torah. According to this, the order should be the korban tamid and all that. The Kohen Gadol with the blood, the blood of the par and the seir and all the unique things. Then taking out the machta, and then doing the ram offerings, and then we're done with this chapter, and then we just go to Bamidbar where it talks about the musaf offerings and the afternoon offerings, whatever else has to be done. But then we'd have a problem, because then what are you going to end up with? You're not going to have 5 dippings in the mikveh. You're only going to have 3 dippings. You're going to have the first dipping before in the morning, the first thing you do before you do the korban tamid. Then we're going to change from bigdei zahav to bigdei lavan. We're going to do a dipping. He's going to do all the special avodat Yom Kippurim. Even everything in the Holy of Holies is going to happen then. Takes out the kaf and the machta, comes out, changes his clothes to bigdei zahav, needs to do 1 more dipping. That's 3. And then he's finished. So, then he does the ayil and the el ha'am, and then he does the rest of the korbanot of the afternoon and extra ones. And then we only have 3. So therefore, what did they say? So why lama huba? So first of all, what's he going into Olam Moed for in this pasuk? He must be going to take out the things he left in from the utensils. Everything was in order except for this verse. This verse is clearly out of order. My time, how do we know it's out of order? Now it's a little bit backwards, but we already know we have a tradition. Okay, we're going to say basically this tradition is going to affect how we read the text. Since we have a tradition that there's 5 dippings and 10 times where you wash your hands and feet, therefore, if you do these in order, you're only going to have 3 dippings and 6 washings of your hands. Okay, now we're going to now bring sources that try to come up with what's the source for the 5 tefillot and the 10 kiddushin. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Minayin l'chamesh tefillot v'asara kiddushin, shetovel kohen gadol u'mekadesh bo bayom. Now, we're not going to exactly get the number, but the question is, how do you know that we need so many? And assuming, and that's what they're going to prove here, is that you need between each, as I said before, between each section and each changing of clothes. They're not going to say how many, but the idea is that once you assume that we know how many, because we know how many times and what he did and what the order and how many times he changed his clothes, then we know how many dippings. The point is, how do you know you need dippings every time he changes from one type of job to a different type? So Rabbi Yehuda says, so we're going to have Rabbi Yehuda, which is Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli, and we're going to have Rebbe, who's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. They're 2 different Rabbi Yehudas. They're going to have a debate about this. So I'm a Rabbi Yehuda. So where do we get this? Talmud Lamal, Uba Aharon al Moed upashat et bigdei habat. This is the very last verse in that section that we were just reading. Okay, pasuk kaf dalet. This is after, now, in this case, it was after he comes out of the Holy of Holies, and then he's going to go to do the Ayil and the El Ha'am. He goes to do the ram offerings. It says, "V'rachatze b'saro b'makom kadosh v'lavashe begadav." So he washes his body. You see here, he goes to the mikvah. V'rachatze b'saro b'makom kadosh v'lavashe begadav v'yatsa v'asa. Right, and then he goes on to do what he does. Halamadita. So what do you learn from here? Kol ha'mishaneh me'avodah la'avodah ta'un tefillah. So from here you learn, anytime he changes from one activity to another, if he washes here, it must be he washes in between all the others. We're going to have some questions on this soon, which is maybe it's only one direction, maybe only when he goes to wear the Kohen Gadol's regular clothes, right, and moves to that kind of activity. We'll get to that soon. If you see the chart, you can see there's going to be some questions. I'm a Rebbe. Rebbe says he has a different source. How do we know about these 5 and 10? Shenema. He is going to quote a verse from the beginning of this section. Pasuk Gimel, which is the first pasuk, right? It says, "Bezot yavo Aaron al hakodesh." This is how Aaron is going to come to this holy of holies. And then it says in pasuk Dalid, "K'tonet bad kodesh yilbash, u'mechnasei bad yual b'saro, u'bavnei bad yachbor, u'mitznefet bad yitznof." These are the 4 garments that the Kohen Gadol wears on Yom Kippurim, which match the 4 garments of a regular Kohen Gadol, right? Maybe the Avnei is a little different. We had a whole debate about that, but what do they say here? Bigdei kodesh hen, these are sanctified clothes. V'rachatz b'mayim et b'saro u'levesham, and he's going to wash his body and then he'll wear them. So what do you see? You see that when he puts on the white clothing, right, the simpler clothes to go into the sanctuary, he's going to wash. So halamadita, and before that, what did he do? Before that, he did the Korban Tamid, right? He did the daily activities. Then he goes to here. So again, if you catch this, the first one discussed when he changes to the Kohen Gadol's normal clothes. And the second proof is when he changes to the Big Day Lavand, the special unique ones he wears on Yom Kippur. So anyway, we'll get back to that. And additionally, Rabbi proves it from the fact that it says Big Day Kodesh. Now, we don't know why he brings the second proof. We're going to get back to this later and try to understand. But he says, from the words Big Day Kodesh, Hukshu kol begadim kulam zelazeh. From here you learn that all the clothes are treated the same way, which we assume that means, and as we can already kind of explain it, which is these are Big Day Kodesh, and that means all Big Day Kodesh are treated the same, that anytime you put on a Big Day Kodesh, this is where we're going to get both directions. That's how we know that you also need to do it when you put on the Big Day Zahav, the golden clothes. B'chamesh avodotin, and now they're telling you that, by the way, this is how I started class because it was important to understand this before, but now they're bringing it in. Chamesh avodotin. There's 5 stages of what he does, and it's when you want to say avodah lavodah, what are the 5? This is, by the way, our source. I said we weren't really going to get to the numbers, but now we're going to get to the numbers. First, we get the basics. Anytime you switch from avodah to avodah, you need to do a dunking. Now we're going to show that there were 5 avodot, and that's how we're going to get to 5 tefillot. And then each time you do a tefillah, right, you're going to also need 2 kiddushim, which we're going to see that also. Chamesh avodot. Tamid shel shachar bebidei zahav. So the korban tamid of the morning, you do in gold clothes. Avodat kohen gadol, number 2, bebidei lavan, right? Avodat hayom. The special for that day, which was the par and the seir and the blood and all the sprinkling and all that, in the white clothes. Elo ve'el ha'am, the ram and the ram of his ram and the ram for the people. Bibigdei zahav, golden clothes. Kaf umachta bibigdei lavan, the spoon and the pan with the white clothes, that's taking them out. Tamid shel ben ha'arbayim bibigdei zahav, and the daily sacrifice of the afternoon in the golden garments. Now, of course, they don't mention the musafim, but that all goes together with the tamid. Uminayin shekol tefillah u'tefillah tzricha shnei kiddushin. So that proved us the 5 mikvahs. How do we know each time you need 2 washings of your hands? So we're going to have 2 different sources. Talmud Lamal, upashat verachatz velavash. We've seen this before. Again, it says ubaharon elo moed upashat et bigdei avad asher lavash. Right, he takes off the bigdei avad asher lavash, and then it says verachatz et besaro b'mayim. Then he washes his body with water. B'makom kadosh velavash et bigadav. And then he puts on new clothes. So the way they understand this, it's a little tricky the way they write it. It sounds like the word rachatz comes up twice, but it doesn't. The point is the word rachatz is right in between taking off and putting on, and therefore we're going to assume that you need it done twice, both after. Now it sounds like from the drasha, you take off the clothes, then you do the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and then you do again kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and then you put on clothes, because if the rachatz is right in between both of them, it sounds like both rechitzot are going to be in between. Take your clothes off, wash, put your clothes on. So we're going to see that soon. Rabbi Shimon Omer, we already saw that that's not exactly the order, so hold off. Rabbi Shimon Omer, that's not from a drasha and those psukim. By the way, the rachatz here, this big debate, because the rachatz, if you read that pasuk simply, what would you think rachatz is? Rachatz usually means go to the mikveh. So it should mean mikveh and not kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. But they say, we're going to see this inside later, that since we already saw in verse 4 in that chapter, it already said verachatz b'mayim. It doesn't need to say rachatz again. From there, you can already learn that anytime you change clothes, you need to wash. Therefore, why does it say rachatz again in this verse later? It's because it's trying to tell you rachatz is something else, a different kind of washing, which is kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So we'll see that inside in a bit. Rabbi Shimon Omer, kavachomer. It's a simple kavachomer. You don't need that pasuk to learn it. And then, in fact, he would probably say rachatz there really does mean mikvah. Uma b'makom she'ein ta'un tefillah ta'un kiddush. Now, we saw this machloket ben Zoma and Rabbi Yehuda about whether you need to go into the mikvah before you go into the azara. Okay, now, we saw that ben Zoma says it's doraita. Rabbi Yehuda says it's Rabbanit. If we go with the fact that it's Rabbanit, it means that on a doraita level, you don't need to go in the mikvah before going into the azara. But what do you need to do? It says in the Torah that you actually need to wash your hands. Okay, that's clear. So now they're going to say, just one second. Find this. Here, I wanted to find the verse where it says it. In Shmot, chapter 40, it says, Bivo'am al moed ubikirvatan el hamizbeach yirchatzu. It says, before you go, right, when you go into Ol Moed and you get close to the Mizbeach, you have to wash. So from there you see that you have to wash your hands. So you don't, on a doraita level, according to Rabbi Yehuda, need to go to mikvah, but you do need to wash your hands. So comes Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon, and he says, if bimkom she'ein ta'un tefillah ta'un kiddush, when you don't need a mikvah and yet you need to wash your hands, makom she'ta'un tefillah ein odin she'ta'un kiddush. If you need tefillah, obviously you're going to also need kiddush, and therefore, again, washing your hands and feet. So therefore, it must be the case. Now, ima lahalan kiddush echad, afkan kiddush echad, but that only explains one kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Why do we need 2? They are going into the azara on a normal day, you'd only need one. So why would you need two here then? Where we get two? Now, there's something weird about this verse. It says, Aaron goes to Olam Moed, which we already said was weird. What is he doing there? But we already explained. He's taking out the kaf and the machta. Now it says, and he takes off his clothes, the white clothing, the linen ones, asher lavash, that he wore. Now, what are the clothes you're going to take off other than the clothes you're wearing? Certainly don't need to tell us this. So, matam alomar asher lavash, what's that coming to teach you? Klum adam poshet elamash lavash, right? People only take off what they normally are wearing. Ela lahakish pshita levisha. It's to say pashat asher lavash. They want to say these two things are connected. Ma levisha ta'un kiddush, af pshita ta'un kiddush. Just like putting on clothes requires washing, likewise taking off the clothes requires washing. This is what we saw before, that it clearly, right, according to the rabbis anyway, one is for the pshita and one is for the levisha, for taking off, and one is for putting on. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. And now we're going back to a source we quoted before, and we're going to go in depth. This is what we're going to do. We saw a bunch of sources. Now we're going to go in depth into them. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Where do we get these 5 and 10? And right that he does on that day. Talmud Lomar Uba Haron El Olam Moed. This is just a quote from what we already saw. So now we're going to go and ask our questions on Rabbi Yehuda. Halamadita, right? What did we say already? This is still a quote. We learned from here. We learned from this pasuk. Anytime you change from one activity to another, you need tefillah, right? This was the verse at the end of the section in Kaf Dalet at the end, right? When he's done with his avodat Yom Kippurim and he puts on the bigdei zahav. So they said, Eshkachami bigdei lavan the bigdei zahav. As I told you, we were going to ask this question. We see when you switch from the white to the gold, you're going to need it. But bigdei zahav, the bigdei lavan minayin. How do you get from the golden clothes to the white clothes that you're going to need to go in the mikvah? So Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael kal v'chomer. He says it's a kal v'chomer, another kal v'chomer. Ma bigdei zahav she'en kohen nechnas behem lefanai v'lefnim ta'un tefillah. If you need to go to the mikvah, when you put on the bigdei zahav, where a kohen doesn't even go into the kodesh kodeshim wearing those clothes, bigdei lavan she'nechnas behem lefanai v'lefnim, which do you think are more sanctified? Must be the Kohen Gadol's clothes on Yom Kippur, where he goes into the Holy of Holies in it. Of course, it's going to need to go to the mikvah first. But then the Gemara says, no, you can knock out that logic. The bigdei zahav are used every single day of the year to receive atonement. So they clearly are on a higher level than the 4 garments that he wears on Yom Kippur that only one day a year he receives atonement. Obviously, it's all your perspective. That one day maybe is greater than all the others, but still, it's all a matter of perspective, and therefore the kal v'chomer really doesn't work. Ela nafkalemi de Rebbe. He must learn it from where Rebbe learns it from. Now, where does Rebbe learn it from? We're going to see this now. Amar Rebbe, minayim l'chamesh tefilot asara kiddushin shetovel kohen gadol u'mekadesh bo bayom. Talmud lomar k'tonepad kodesh yilbash. Remember, he learns it from the beginning verse, which is going into the white clothing. Going into the, it's talking about the white clothing specifically. When he puts on the white clothing, it's not the first dunking, it's the second, but it's when he puts on the white clothing to do the special avodat Yom Kippurim, that's when he goes to the mikvah. So you learn from this to all the others. So again, they say, well, now it's going to be the mirror image of the last sugya. We see now bigdei zahav to bigdei lavan when you put on the special Yom Kippur clothes. But bigdei lavan le bigdei zahav minayim. But how do we know that when you switch back into the regular Kohen Gadol clothes, you're going to need to do it? So Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael kal v'chomer. It's a kal v'chomer. Ma bigdei lavan. Now, just as we ended the last one, since bigdei lavan she'en kaparata meruba, you don't use these every day of the year to get atonement. So they're obviously on a lower level. And yet tu'unim tefillah, and yet you have to go to the mikvah. Bigdei zahav shekaparata meruba eno din tu'unim tefillah. But therefore, the bigdei zahav, which require a lot of atonement, of course they're going to need tefillah. But ikal mifrach, you can knock this out also, because you could say ma bigdei lavan sheken nechnas behem lefanai v'lifnim. But you can knock that out by saying, but maybe the white ones are more sanctified because you go into the Holy of Holies with them. So that's why Hainu de Katane, that's why Rebbe ends. Remember, we said we get back to this with those words, Ve'omer, and additionally it says, Big de Kodeshen, for Chatza B'Sarov Amayim U'Levei Sham. And that was to teach you, remember, all the begadim are treated the same, that if those need, then those also need. And then you could say that Rabbi Yehuda is going to use that same logic for his answer. It's the Big Day Kodesh that teaches, if we learned it here, we're going to learn it for everything. Chamesh avodot hen. Now we're going back to this line that said about the 5 different things you do that day. Tamid shachar b'bigdei zahav, avodat hayom b'bigdei lavan, right? You start off with the tamid of shachar in the morning, regular clothes. Avodat hayom, the special Yom Kippur stuff, he does b'bigdei lavan in the Holy of Holies. Elo ve'ela'am b'bigdei zahav. Then he does the ram for himself and the people in golden clothes. Kafu machta b'bigdei lavan. He takes out the spoon in the pan with his white clothes. Tamid shel bein arba'im b'bigdei zahav. He finishes off with the afternoon everyday offering in the golden clothes. By the end of today, you'll know this by heart because we've said it so many times. Again, we're just quoting this source because we're going to go into it. How do you know that each one needs 2 washings of your hands and feet? So now they say, what do you mean? This is talking about dunking in the mikveh. It's not talking about kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Rachatz always means in the Torah mikveh. This is what I told you we'd see in Sat. We see imeno and yam tefillah, but you don't really need this for tefillah. Dinafka lemi big day kodeshem. You learned it from that first verse in the beginning of the chapter, in verse 4. Right, again, we're in chapter 16, verse 4. It says, Verachatz, big day kodeshem, verachatz b'mayim episaro levesham. We already know from there that you need to go in the mikvah anytime you change your clothes. We just learned that from big day kodesh. So therefore, you don't need it to tell you there, verachatz mikvah. So this is a classic, what we call imeno and yan. So if you don't need it to teach you about mikvah, it must be coming to teach about something else. What's the something else? It must be kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So therefore, Tanei Wanyan the Kiddush. To which the Gemara then says, the obvious question, why didn't the Torah then say Kiddush and not Rachatz? They wanted you to know that the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim is done in the same way that the Tefillah is done. How does it mean in the same way? In what way? So we don't do it in the same way. One's in a mikvah and one's, right, the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, generally they did with a ketone of mine, like a golden pitcher. Just the first one was done from the Shiur, Rashi says, and the other ones, right, the first one was just in the beginning of the day. The other ones were all done with this jug of gold. So it's not that. So what is similar? Ma kiddush b'makom kadosh, af tefillah b'makom kadosh. Just like the kiddush is done inside the azara, likewise the dippings, and this is now we understand the halacha that we saw a long time ago, that the tefillah has to be done in the kodesh. Remember, that was the whole thing with the Beit HaParva is in the azara, other than that first one, which is outside and near the Beit HaTinas on top of the Shar Hamayim. So therefore, af tefillah makom kadosh. V'Rabbi Yehuda kiddush menale. Where does Rabbi Yehuda learn kiddush from? Because he doesn't have this pashat rachatz lavash. So where does he get it from? Nafkalemi deral Rabbi Elazar beRabbi Shimon. Okay, he learns it out from where Rabbi Elazar beRabbi Shimon learns it out, which was the Kal V'chomer. Remember, you have a Kal V'chomer. If the tefillah, if on a regular day you go into the azara, you don't need tefillah on a doraita level, according to, again, it has to be only according to Rabbi Yehuda. And yet you need kiddush. Of course, when you need tefillah, you're also going to need kiddush. By the way, what's the anti-logic? What's the way to knock out that logic? You could say maybe you don't need kiddush if you've already done tefillah. I mean, tefillah is a whole body experience. Kiddush is just your hands. Maybe if you've already dunked, you wouldn't need it. Okay, and maybe that's why not everyone agrees with him and they have different drasha. Amar Rav Chisda. Now Rav Chisda is going to point out, and for this there's a chart on the sheet. Ha de Rebbe mafkami de Rabbi Meir umafkami de Rabbanan. Now, as I said before, according to Rebbe, pashat rachatz lavash, and the rachatz goes in both directions. But notice, when do you do it? If you take it literally, that it's you take off the clothes, then you wash your hands, then you wash your hands again, and then you put the clothes on. Now that doesn't match, if you remember from what we saw yesterday, it doesn't match Rabbi Meir and it doesn't match the rabbis. Why? Mafkami de Rabbanan de ilu Rabbanan amre. So I charted this all out and I tried to put the kiddush in a different color so that you could see the different, where it comes up in different places. So according to the rabbis, so this is Rav Chisda, okay? And he's explaining Rebbe in his way, the way he understands Rebbe. He says it doesn't fit with Rabbanan. De ilu Rabbanan amre kashu lavush mekadesh. Remember they said you first wash your hands, then take off your clothes. Then you put on the clothes and then you wash your hands because you want to be dressed at all times when you wash the hands. And according to Rebbe, it's the opposite. You're not dressed when you do both washings because it's in between the taking off the clothes and the putting them back on. And it doesn't agree with Rabbi Meir either. He says that you do pashat rachatz, you take off the clothes, then you wash, then lavash rachatz, you get dressed, and then you wash. So the second time you're actually dressed, and that's not in the right order. So there only one is out of order. Right? And he said, no, you're not dressed when you wash your hands both times. So Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, he has a different understanding of Rebbe. He says, even Rebbe agrees that you do it after. My time, Madam Kra, okay, this is another pasuk that talks about Kiddush Yadayim, which is in Shmot Lamed, pasuk bet. When you come to Ol Moed, you wash your hands and you won't die. Or when you go to the Mizbeach, you're going to need to wash your hands. Just want to see 1 second. Right, it's a different pasuk than Rashi quoted before, but it's another pasuk that talks about washing hands. So now we're going to say, he says the following. Notice what it says here. It says, or when you go to the altar. The point is, you wash your hands and then you immediately go to the altar. Now, if you're not wearing the clothes, then you can't walk right away to the altar. So they say it's only someone who just needs to go to the altar, doesn't need to do anything else after washing his hands. So therefore, can't be someone who has to both put on clothes and then go to the altar. It means wash your hands and then immediately go to the altar. So therefore, it must be you wash your hands when you're dressed. So he learns it from some other verse. And therefore, he thinks that even Rebbe agrees that it's after. Even though in the verse it comes in between, it still means that the washing was done after. Amalei Rav Acha b'rei de Rava le Rav Ashi. Lo Rav Chisda ile le Rav Acha, v'lo Rav Acha ile de Rav Chisda. De'im came le Rebbe havu chamesh zar kiddushin. So Rav Acha b'rei de Rava says to Rav Ashi, Rav Chisda doesn't hold by Rav Acha, and Rav Acha doesn't hold by Rav Chisda, because if that were the case, it's if you somehow made some combined shita of both, what would you end up with? But according to Rav Chisda, you have to wash before you get dressed. On the other hand, according to Rav Acha, according to Rav Chisda, you have to wash before you get dressed. According to Rav Acha, you get dressed and then you wash. So if we combine the two, then you're going to have to both wash before and wash after. We're going to end up with 15 because you're going to end up on the getting undressed. You're going to have to wash. Getting dressed, you're going to have to wash before because that's the way the verse said it, according to the way Rav Chisda read Rebbe. And according to Rav Acha, you're going to also have to wash after so that there's no break between the washing of your hands and the getting to the altar, in which case you'll end up with each time 3 Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, and you'll have 15, and that's clearly not the case. Now we're back to the Mishnah. So finished with all the issue of the dippings and the washings, and now we're moving on to what happens when he does the Korban Tamid. Hibiulo et Hatamid Chatzo. My Chatzo. I said, we get here. What exactly is this? Amar Ula Lishna de Katlahu. It means killing, slaughtering. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak Maika. Where do we get this from? The Chatzo is to kill. Egla Yefefia Mitzrayim Keretz Mitzafon Baba. My Mashma. What does that mean? That pasuk. Kedimitargim Rav Yosef. Malka Ye'eh Hava Mitzrayim. They were a beautiful kingdom. Amamim Kitolim Mitzvona Yetunale. But the nations from the north, murderous nations are going to come upon Mitzrayim. So here you see, Keretz Mitzafon is murderous. Kratzo Bekama, how much do you slaughter before he passes it over? Remember, he can't catch the blood if he's busy slaughtering. So Amar Ula Berov Shnaim, he has to do the majority of 2 simanim. Remember, the trachea and the esophagus, when you slaughter, you have to cut them both. But now we're going to learn, well, to be Yotzei Shchita, and he has to do the Shchita. So he has to chef both of them. But Rov is like you could be Yotzei, but you're really supposed to cut them entirely. So he cuts most of the simanim, and then he leaves it for someone else to finish the job, and he goes to catch the blood. Also, Rabbi Yochanan said the majority of both, and Af Rish Lakish Savar Barov Shnayim. Even Rish Lakish held that way. Now, why they say even Rish Lakish? Because they're going to show something Rish Lakish said. From here, they're going to infer that he thinks Rov Shnayim. To Amar Rish Lakish, because he said the following: since we said rove of one is as if you've done the slaughtering, okay? The majority of one is fine. This is just talking about slaughtering in general. So therefore, why does it say rov echad ba'of and rov shnayim b'be'ema? Why does it say that when it comes to a bird, you need the majority of one siman, and when it comes to an animal, you need the majority of two, right? Again, the trachea and the esophagus. The birds have a bit of a different law with that. Lafisha shaninu, so he now explains, since it says, Heviu lo et hatamid, kchatzo merek acher shchita al yado v'kibel adam uzrako. As he's saying, if generally we learn that that's the case, then why did they specifically say that you need the majority of two? We know this. So they say, well, it's because of our Mishnah. Since it said, Chatzo umerek acher shchita al yado, and then the Kohen gets the blood, accepts it, the Kohen Gadol, Yachol lo merek yehe pasul. You might have thought, if someone, since he cut the rove, you might have thought, since it says in our Mishnah, someone else has to finish it, it sounds like it's no good if they don't finish it, which sounds like rove shnayim isn't good enough. Yachol lo yehe merek. Right, so you might have thought lo merek yeh pasul. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, yachol lo merek yeh pasul. Why could we possibly have thought that? Im ken, they're just taking a break in this brayta to question something. This is a side thing. Im ken havya le'avodah be'echad. If that's the case, then it would have been 1 second. It would have been. I read it wrong. That's why I was wrong. Havya le'avodah ba'acher. It should say. In that case, it would be an avodah by somebody else. That's if you need the marika as a major part of the avodah, then in the end, you're going to have it that someone else did the shechita, and you can't have that. The Kohen Gadol has to do everything. So therefore, it must be that rov shnayim, right? And as you might have thought, lo yeh merek yeh pasul. How could you have possibly thought that? Because if you say that, rov avodah b'shnayim utnan, and it says in the Mishnah, kol avodah yom kippurim enek kshirot elabo. So you can't possibly say that you would have thought if he didn't do marika, it would be pasul. Can't possibly think that, because it's obvious it wouldn't be pasul, because otherwise it has to be done by the Kohen Gadol. And we know that. So the marika can't be a major thing. But back to the Braita, Hachi Kamar. So therefore it should read like this. Yachol yeh pasul mi d'Rabbanan. You might have thought that maybe it's disqualified in a rabbinic level. In other words, mida oraita, 2 simanim is enough. Mide Rabbanan, you might need more than that. You might need to complete the slaughter. That's why it told us rov echad ba'of and rov shnayim b'be'ema, so that we realize that you actually don't need to do both simanim, even on a Rabbanan level. That's what it's telling us. So the rov shnayim is to tell you on a Rabbanan level that rov shnayim is sufficient. Okay, to which they're going to ask, I'll just finish up, even though we're in tomorrow's daf. So if it's not disqualified in the rabbinic level, then why do you need another Kohen to come and finish the job and cut them entirely? If rov shnayim is good, not only on a doraita level, also on a rabbinic level, answer is mitzvah l'marek. It's just better to do it that way. It's not necessary, not even on a rabbinic level, but it's better. It's kind of like a nicer, cleaner. It's done, finished, complete, but you don't really need it. Anyway, the point of this whole thing is that you get that Rish Lakish clearly holds 2 simanim is what the Kohen Gadol does, rov of shnayim. He does the majority, which basically counts as halachic shchita. And the other Kohen is just kind of finishing things up for a nice touch. Okay, with that, we're going to finish today's stuff, and we will pick up from Abaye on tomorrow.